Morning, church. That sounded good. Sounded like you might have gotten an hour extra sleep last night. We're going to be in Mark chapter 8 and in Matthew chapter 16. They both tell the same story, but from a little bit different point of view. We'll start in Matthew chapter 8. I know you folks have heard me talk about this. This is, in my opinion, one of the more humorous pieces of New Testament scripture. So beginning with verse 14 of Mark chapter 8, it says that the disciples had forgotten to bring bread. And I love that statement. The disciples forgot bread. You can't have church. You can't have potluck. You can't have fellowship, without food, of course. And so in the hustle of getting ready to go over to Caesarea Philippi, they just totally forgot to pack lunch, So they get in the boat, and I have a difficult time determining whether they were talking about it in the boat or whether Jesus just perceived it. But read with me. He says, verse 14, the disciples have forgotten to bring bread except for one loaf of Roman meal bread. That's what they had, was Roman meal bread. Well, they were occupied by the Romans. I mean, what else would it have been? They'd forgotten to bring bread except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. And Jesus had to say this at this particular time. He says, be careful. Jesus warned, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But I see in this what is... and maybe I'm making more of it than is really there, and if so, you can tell me after church. But I think that we are so often so focused on the mundane things in our discipleship, and especially on Sunday morning when we gather together, and the scriptures say that Jesus is right here with us, and we're worried about all sorts of things that just don't matter. I mean, they just don't matter at all. The bread of life was riding in the boat with them, and they're worried about they forgot to bring bread. So I see in the disciples a lot of John Dennis, the fretting over things that really just don't matter. We worry about the insignificant things, and a lot of times we miss the big picture. Tim really, and this was already in my slide, but Tim almost stole my thunder this morning when he was talking about time. And wow, what a statement. Hey, you don't hear this very often from people, but I love you enough to tell you, you're going to die. And that's just a fact. And we in America, we don't like to talk about that, but it's reality, and then there is eternity, and that's a reality as well. And who is Jesus? I mean, that's the real question. In fact, that's the focus of this whole chapter. Jesus will say in a few minutes, we talked about this last week, who do men say that I am? And of course they all have theories. And then Jesus says, and who do you say that I am? So I love the fact that Jesus begins to mess with their mind a little bit. So they're fretting over whether or not they, Peter, you should have brought bread. Well, I thought you were going to bring bread. And, they're doing this. That's what I know. It doesn't actually say that they were having this conversation, but I think they were having this conversation in the boat, probably whispering, Thomas, you idiot, I laid the bread on the table before we left, and you were supposed to get it with the other stuff, and they're arguing about it. And so Jesus says, and I love the way Jesus always finds a teachable moment. And so they're worried about whether they brought bread. They didn't bring bread, and Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees and Herod. And somebody in the boat said, I knew we should have brought bread. That. So, it just whistles right past the disciples. They completely miss the fact that Jesus isn't talking about bread at all. And one of the things that I love about the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew, and some people find this to be a discrepancy. I don't find it to be a discrepancy. If four of us were standing on a street corner and we watched a traffic accident or something, and then people are interviewing us afterwards, Ralph would have seen things that I didn't see, and I would have seen things that Ralph didn't see. And so why do you have four Gospels? Well, you have four Gospels because these are real, and we talked about this several months ago, and I'm not going to go back into it again, except to say that these are real eyewitness accounts. And so Mark sees things that Matthew didn't see, and Matthew sees things that Mark didn't see. And I love the fact that when you get to the end of this, they discuss with one another, we don't have any bread. And aware of the discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves and for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? And they said, so he gives them a kind of a quiz. How many basketfuls did we pick up? Verse 20, when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls did we pick up? So what's Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, if I was worried about food, don't you think I could, if I could create some more food? This isn't a food thing. I'm trying to get you guys to see something else. And so if you get down to the end of this dialogue, they answer 7, and then verse 21, he said to them, what? What? You guys still don't get it? So how does Mark leave this story? Mark leaves the story of Jesus saying, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. He leaves the story with the disciples with a real dumb look on their face. They're in the boat, and Jesus says, what? You guys don't understand this? If you go over and look at Matthew, which we won't do at the moment, just for time's sake, but if you read Matthew chapter 16, at the end of the dialogue about the scribes and Pharisees, the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees, it says, and then they understood. Now, I love this. I think sometimes I worship in the church of St. Mark, and I just don't get it. And sometimes I worship in the church of St. Matthew, and I have that little epiphany where I say, oh, I understand what he's talking about. But whether I get it or whether I don't get it, the work of God in my life just keeps on marching on. Isn't that just an amazing statement? Just that idea that whether I understand what he's doing, whether I understand the scriptures correctly, whether I understand pretty much anything, God's still at work in my life. And it doesn't really matter whether I understand it or not. I'm not saying we don't need to study. I'm not saying that we don't need to try to grow in our understanding. I'm just saying that it's not all about what you know. It's about the fact that you're riding in a boat with Jesus. By the way, what was the teaching of the Pharisees and the scribes? Basically, what the scribes and Pharisees were all about was the externals. They were all about modifying behavior. They were all about the superficial. And consequently, this hypocrisy just bred almost well, it was just a consistent, ongoing march of hypocrisy. And it works that way today. If our focus is on the externals, if our focus is on don't drink, don't cuss, don't smoke, don't, all of those don'ts, and you have to do this and you have to do that, then when we come to church, everybody is going to put on their little, we leave the house and we head for church and we pull on this mask and we walk in the door and we pretend to be what we think everybody else is. And then we get home and we can take off the mask, and it's so exhausting to wear the mask. And so there is this focus on the externals, on the superficial, and it's all about deeds and observances. And Jesus says, and I love this, beware of that leaven. I mean, what does leaven do? Do you ever see? We don't. When I was growing up, my mama would make homemade rolls, and you knew Mom was making homemade rolls, even if you were 2 houses down from the house playing army with the guys. You could smell that fresh cooked bread, and I would watch Mom, and she'd knead the dough, and they had the yeast in it, and then she'd just lay it over there, and you could hear actually you can't hear the yeast working, but boy, you can smell it, and it's so silent the way it just permeates the whole lump of dough. So Jesus says there is a danger in this focus on the externals. There's a danger in this superficiality. There's a danger in this works religion that just permeates the whole lump of dough. Is that the word, lump? That didn't sound right. Lump. Every one of us in this room is a mess. And you know what? That's good news. I mean, it's good news in the sense that once we get to that place where we recognize that everybody in this room's a mess, we don't have to pretend that we're not a mess anymore. One more slide, we're done. How's that for expediting? I don't have as good a picture as Marvin has of Caesarea Philippi. And if you haven't been in the class that Marvin's been teaching, that's been a lot of fun. Not just fun, but it helps your faith grow if you can see that what we're talking about, and I love this about Christianity, what we're talking about didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at a latitude and a longitude and at a certain point in time, and it's there. If you want to go back and retrace the steps of Jesus, you can go back and retrace the steps of Jesus. And Marvin was talking about this place right here as possibly, this is in Caesarea Philippi, this huge rock as possibly the place where Matthew chapter 8, or Mark chapter 8, and the passage in Matthew that we were looking at, both probably took place, or possibly took place right here. So I want to turn over there to Matthew chapter 16, because Matthew adds some detail that Mark doesn't add in this segment here. So verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." So John had been put to death, and some people thought, well, maybe John's come back to life. And so they were very superstitious in that regard. There were some Old Testament passages that indicated that John the Baptist would return in some form or fashion. And so, there's some speculation, who Jesus might be. And then verse 15, he says, but what about you? He asked, who do you say that I am? And Simon, being kind of the extroverted spokesman of the bunch, steps up and says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of John. What was his name? Simon. He is Simon, the son of a fellow by the name of Jonah. And prior to this event, and it's detailed, and by the way, in John chapter 1, verse 42, Jesus predicts that one day we're going to call this guy Peter. But he is right now a fellow by the name of Simon. So he says, who do men say that I am? And or who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. I'm about to lose my voice. You are the Christ, the Messiah, is what the word Christ means, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So, there's a lot of confusion over what rock are we talking about. What rock is it that Jesus is going to build his church, upon which Jesus is going to build his church? So the three prevailing ideas are, number one, that he's talking about this physical rock, which is pretty silly. And so I'm going to skip right on past that. Probably one of the most substantial beliefs is that Jesus was saying that he was going to build his church on the foundation of Peter. Because the word Peter means what? Rock. But we have a little problem in that, though in the English there's only one word, rock, Jesus uses two different words here for rock. You are rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, is the way it's forced to be translated in English, realizing that Petra and Petros. Petros means, okay, so how many of you guys remember the Flintstones? Okay, and you remember Bam Bam and his female partner was Pebbles. There you go. Well, Jesus actually named Peter Pebbles. Okay? I know it's not a very masculine thing, but the word Petros in the Greek literally means pebble. Okay? So it doesn't make any sense in the Greek even for Jesus to say, hey, Pebbles, I'm going to build my rock on top of you. I'm going to build my church on top of you. That doesn't make any sense. You don't find a pebble and build a house on it. You find something substantial. So when Jesus says, you are pebbles, and upon this Petra, which is a massive outcropping of rock. So in the original language, Jesus would have had, he could not have said in any way, any plainer, that Peter was not going to be the foundation of the church. So we're going to skip that. The third prevailing concept is, because Jesus says, flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my heavenly Father has revealed this to you, and upon this rock I will build my church. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, it's upon revelation. Revelation is the rock upon which Jesus built his church. Well, I got news for you. The only problem with that theory is that pretty much everything in the New Testament that talks about the foundation of the church pretty much has, now I'm going to stretch you here, okay? Pretty much has Jesus as the foundation of the church. So it's not Peter, it's not a physical rock, it's not Revelation, it's Jesus. In fact, the foundation of the church is the statement that Peter made. You are Christ. Yeah, that's it. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is the foundation of the church. That is the gospel. We were doing this morning. What is the gospel of Jesus? And I am astounded, and I say this regularly, and you guys hear me talk about this all the time, but I'm astounded at how many Christians who have a lot of miles on the odometer who still cannot, when I ask them the question, yeah, but what is the gospel of Jesus? They can't give me a straight answer. What is the gospel of Jesus? Christ and Him crucified. That is the gospel. I've listed 3 verses at the bottom of this slide: 2 Timothy 2 verse 8, Colossians 1 verse 21, and 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I'm going to skip 2 Timothy 2:8 and Colossians 1:21. You guys can write those down and look them up. They're Paul saying in different ways basically the same thing, that Jesus is the Son of God, and that is the gospel. But I do want you to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15 with me. And we're almost done here. 1 Corinthians 15. By the way, there are 4 wells. There are probably more than this, but there are 4 basic cisterns that modern 21st century Americans go to be fulfilled. And I don't have time to really unpack them, but I'm just going to put them out there. I think the first one is the self-help thing. And by the way, differing churches across the city of Rapid and across the United States, some of them will focus on one of these 4 as, well, that's not true, probably. Some of them will focus at least on this first one, is this idea that, what's really going to fulfill you is a better version of you. And once you're functioning better, then everything's going to get better. Okay? When you're wealthier, we talked a little bit about this morning in Bible class too. I got news for you. If you came into $1 million tomorrow, the you that would emerge as a millionaire tomorrow will be just as disappointing to you as the you today. Okay? So, I mean, 6-pack abs, that's what it's going to take for you to really be happy with you. I got news for you. The 6-pack ab you is going to be just as disappointing and unfulfilling. And the second well that people go to is other people. We look to our mates. Jerry Maguire. You complete me stuff, and which is, it's just. I mean, it's Hollywood, but that's all it is. It's just Hollywood. There's, and if you, by the way, if you do that to your spouse, if you demand that she complete you, or if you demand that he complete you, not only are you going to be sorely disappointed, but you are going to corrupt that relationship. Or our kids, I mean, why there are so many brats in this culture? There are so many brats in this culture because we've got so many people who think that they can live vicariously through their kids and they can create a better me in my kid. And so they treat the kids like they are gods, and then when they grow up, they are just brats. Need to go back to the spanking stage, you know. Amen. I probably will get email on that one, but the physical, you know, the third well is that the well of the physical stuff, eating and drinking and sex and if that, you know, if those things were satisfying, if they really filled us up, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that it doesn't. How many magazine articles are written? I mean, just standing in line at Safeway and looking at the magazines that are standing there and all of the different articles that are written about how to have a better intimate relationship with him or her. I mean, if that was the answer, how many articles would really need to be written? Only one. You don't have to be Einstein to see that this stuff isn't fulfilling us. And then there's religion. The Church of Christ cannot save you. That got me in trouble about 15 years ago. Some of you were there that day. And, you know, I love the Church of Christ. I'm glad to be a part of the group that is referred to as the Church of Christ. We're powerless to save people. The preacher can't save you. The song leader can't save you. I'm even going to do one more that probably get me more email, and that is the Bible cannot save you. The only thing in the universe that can save you is Jesus. And the Bible is beneficial in that it points you to Jesus. But the gospel of Jesus Christ is this. Chapter 15, verse 1 of 1 Corinthians, and we are done. Now, brothers, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. Brothers and sisters, it's time for God's people to take a stand. By this gospel, you are saved. If you hold firmly to the word I preached to you, otherwise you have believed in vain. For what I received I passed on to you as of first importance. Here it is, drum roll, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that He was buried, and that He was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that He appeared to Peter and then to the 12. And after that He appeared to a whole bunch more. So, what is the foundation of the church? Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I know I do this quite often, but I don't know. I mean, at one point, Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul says, I've determined to know nothing among you but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. So, but I know at about week 50 or 49 in the year, if all I did was get up here and say, Jesus Christ and Him crucified, and get down, you guys would say, could we change the channel? So, but Jesus Christ and Him crucified is the only thing that can fulfill you. It's the only thing that can save you. Jim, come lead us an invitation song.